All right, we will go ahead and get started for our fourth and final presentation of the event entitled Native Plant Seed Collecting and Growing from Seed with Cait Caughey. Cait Caughey, she, her, is a farmer, seed saver, and plant teacher. She has farmed for 10 plus years, operating 2 specialty crop farms in Southwest Iowa, including Mullein Hill Farm in the Loess Hills. Cait loves to connect all ages with plant species. Cait uses her experience to teach beginning farmers and farm to school at the Center for Rural Affairs and serves on the Iowa Prairie Network Board. Most of all, Cait loves being a mom to her 2 kiddos, Catalpa and Mira. So welcome, Cait.
Thanks. Everyone. Can you hear me okay? I'm probably gonna have to stand on my tiptoes for y'all to hear me because I'm short. And this is such an expansive room. All of you are way over there. I'm in this tiny little corner. So I guess just if you can't hear me, if I'm trailing off, just kind of raise your hand or wave at me. Also feel free to move around. Again, it's a little weird being behind this podium. I'm usually teaching this class in a prairie or in a greenhouse. So I will do my best to teach it from behind a podium with a screen. And it's freezing in here. Yeah. So if I'm doing this a lot because I'm cold. Okay, great. So let's get started. Thank you so much for being here. I want to say thank you to Nancy Cruz, who is part of Milkweed Matters, and also PATH for inviting me to come and speak today. And just thank you to everyone who is part of PATH and putting this awesome event on. It's so exciting to see so many people excited about the prairie and pollinators and out today, and who all got their plants to take home. Awesome. So that's amazing. I love that. I love just imagining all of your gardens, farms, land where you're going to plant those out when you go back. Fall is such a wonderful time for planting. So I want to start out and just talk about the land that we're on here today is ancestral land of many indigenous peoples. And that's really important for us to note when we're talking about prairie, when we're talking about conservation, when we're talking about habitat, right? A lot has changed. And this land that we're on, there's a very small and certain group of people who are making decisions about this land and what we should do when it comes to the prairie. And a lot of that has to do with land ownership, right? And so we know a couple things, and that is that the conservation industry and also landowners are predominantly white people. So I think we have to have that context whenever we're talking about getting out there and being on the prairie and on this land that we do not own. And so I just want to do a little plug for the Honor Native Land Fund. That's part of the Great Plains Action Network. Check them out. Their website is amazing. And this is one way that you can engage in what we call land and seed rematriation. So it's talking about what can we do to continue to get the land and the seed back to the folks that actually belong to the land. So a little bit about me, you already had a bio, so I'm not going to talk too much, but I'm really into farming and I've been doing that for over a decade. I still consider myself a beginning farmer. These are my kids. I love engaging them in all the stuff that we do as much as they want to. My son is now a 7th grader, and so he's got, a social life and lots of sports and activities to do. So I love supporting them also in what they love. But they collect seed with me. And outside of farming, I've been teaching agriculture for a while to beginning farmers specifically. And I work at the Center for Rural Affairs. So if you're familiar with them or you want to know more, I can tell you more about the center after this. And please feel free to come up and ask questions. We will have a Q&A at the end. So it's a little bit about me. The most important thing I really want to say today is that I am not an expert. I am a person who learns by experience. I'm a person that has learned everything I'm going to tell you today by other teachers and literally being out in the prairie, okay? So there are other people here in this room and outside those doors who are probably way more expert than me. And I want you to know that that's okay. It's okay to learn by doing it with your hands and your body and by awareness and listening to the land. And so I did not go to school for anything I'm teaching you here today. But I've spent a lot of time being in the prairie. I have lived for 6 years near a remnant prairie. So that's a prairie that has never been farmed or tilled or plowed or had livestock on it. And I have also learned through, and I have them listed here, so I don't need to read them off, but through the incredible organizations we do have here in Iowa, the Iowa Prairie Network, the INHF, Golden Hills, just getting out into the prairie. And I want to really encourage you to just take time to sit with plants, have a plant journal, or if you like to draw and sketch, that's really how you are going to learn these plants. It's how you're going to learn how to grow them, and it's how you're going to learn when and how to seed collect. And then lastly, I'll say that I absolutely love the book Botany in a Day, because I think if you want to learn plants, you need to learn the plant families and you need to learn the scientific names. And so if you're out on prairie walks, we really try to use the scientific names. The common names are wonderful and colloquial and beautiful, but we don't really know what plant we're talking about when we use those names. So it's really important for us to learn the Latin names. It's a shared language that we can all know how to identify these properly. Okay, so I already mentioned that I think it's important for you to be in the prairie, and these are some quotes I really love. I hope you leave here today also knowing that we are not separate from nature. You're part of the natural world. We rely on the soil for literally everything that we have: our clothing, our food, our medicine. We can't be in existence. I was just at a really awesome talk with a forester the other day that said we would die before we cut every tree down. We would die as a species. We would be gone before we could actually take the time to cut every forest down, because we're so reliant on them. I really love Rowan White. Check her out. Seeds are only the beginning. Every seed we plant is a tiny, loving prayer in action. And you have seeds, you have plants that were grown from seed that you get to take home and start your little pocket of prairie. So let's talk about seed collection. That is the first task at hand that I was given for today. So where to collect? Remnant prairies are a wonderful place to collect due to finding that ecotype or that local species of plants there. And so I would recommend getting to know people who might live at places where there are remnant prairies. When it comes to county or state land, we need to ask ahead of time. It's going to depend on the space. So I cannot tell you, here's a list of places where you can go out today and collect prairie seed. It's going to be really dependent on those and who's in charge of those specific land. Growing your own prairie using eco-type plants, which you received today mostly, that is the best place to seed collect. So that's another reason why you want to grow your own prairies, so that you can collect the seed from those plants that you're growing. I collect a lot of seed, obviously, from a remnant, but then I also collect seed from what I grow out. I will say in general, I collect seed from plants I grow out. Like my seed stock is if it is a species that's very rare, right? When I'm not finding a lot, when I don't want to disturb, when I don't want to, I want it to kind of do. That's another reason why I think as folks who are growing out plants, we want to make sure that we have our own restorations and our own plantings that we're pulling from. And it's just really important to be mindful. So to know how to collect the seed when it's ready, and to make sure that we are never, ever, ever disturbing that root, right? We want roots in the ground at all times, even in farming. And that is the best thing for our soil. And so we want to make sure that when we are seed collecting or touching or pulling any plant, that we're not pulling that root out. However, small children will pull roots out all the time. And that is why we have school gardens, so we can allow them to pull those roots out, and we can teach them it's okay. You pulled out all the strawberry plants today, but you know what? We're going to just like plant them back really gently. Or oops, you were picking a tomato and you pulled the whole plant up. Like, that's okay. So we do know that that happens, but most of us here in this room are adults, and so we can interact with the plants and make sure we're not harming them. The next question is when to collect. So I'm going to say when to go out in the prairie is all the time, to observe, to see the wildlife at all seasons, even the pollinators. But the window here for seed collection is usually late May all the way until the middle of November. And we are literally right now in the peak of seed collection. So there are some species that are more ready in spring. I like some woodland species. And so you want to keep an eye on those and some early spring species. But really September, October, beginning of November, again, depending on like what our weather is doing, right? Those are the best times and our harvest window. So we're going to talk about what I call foraging guidance when I first started getting into plant foraging. And it's really easy to remember: right time, right plant, right place. Okay. And what this means is that we only want to collect from plants. And specifically, we're talking today about prairie seeds at the right time. So we don't want to take seeds before they're ready. We want to make sure that they are dry and mature seeds. Right plant, we don't want to be out there collecting brome seed, do we? No, my friends, we don't. So that's one of the first things we do. Like when we go on a prairie walk to collect seed, we're like, that is brome grass. Do not touch it. That is Cydotes grama. That's what we're collecting right now. So you want to make sure you have the right plant, and you want to make sure you document the name for that plant. Okay. There's a lot of different goldenrods, and I suck at them. There's a lot of different blazing stars. I'm a little better at those ones. So we really need to know what that scientific name is. And then right place, again, we need to make sure that we are able to collect at that site, at that space, and it's okay for us to do that. And then I like to add one at the end, which is right amount. And for those of you that forage, again, it's that you never take plants from a stand that is struggling or where there are very few plants there. And the rule is usually a third or less of anything that you take from that area. Use your best judgment. We also know that there are plants that are really endangered, and we don't want to collect from those like literally at all. And we never want to dig roots. So has anyone ever like harvested ramps before, or gone to forage for, or heard of ramps? Yeah, so they're like really, really delicious. And unfortunately, when they get established, they get really over collected, and people dig the roots up, and then they aren't going to maintain in that area. So it's really unfortunate, and they are crazy delicious. I'm not sure how well you can see this, but this is from the Tallgrass Prairie Center. We are so fortunate and lucky to have them in our state. But this is a free publication along with many others that they have on their website. They're often usually at events as well, at a booth, and you can pick up a ton of these. Golden Hills gives these out at like every event, but I use this. So this is by species, and it tells you when the seed is actually most likely to be ready. Okay, so Tallgrass Prairie Center. This is just like a reference guide that I go and check out. I'm like, okay, cool, Cait, it's like August. What kind of seed am I going to find out there? So I will go back and still look at this. You don't have to memorize everything. It's totally okay. There are wonderful people, educators making these handouts for you out there. So it's cool. How to collect seed. So you don't need a lot of fancy equipment. There are obviously folks that are collecting seed on really large scales. So they have like tractors. They even have combines for prairie seed. So cool. I hope someday I might get to participate in that. But I'm collecting everything by hand, and you can too. Buckets work great. Paper bags, literally like the sandwich paper bags, are my all-time favorite thing, because like you can fit a lot of seed in just one of those bags. Oftentimes I'll take a tote. I'll put all my sandwich bags in the tote. I have them labeled with the species, with the Latin names. And so then I can just carry my tote around. And once I get to the plant that I want, I pull out the proper bag for it and I collect into that bag. So anyway, that's my method that I usually use. You might want clippers. Garden shears can be helpful, or gloves for some of the more pokey, spiny seed pods like our echinaceas and potentially rattlesnake master. And make sure you label everything. The other thing I want to say is that I don't collect for a lot of seed mixes because I don't sell seed mixes, but you can also mix your seed together. That's no problem. If your goal is to do a restoration or a planting by seed, go out there and collect your seed and mix it all together. I really like to do single species and then process my single species and then make a mix, is if I'm going to make a mix. So that's what I like to do. Collect in community. So this is a picture of me, and I think my son is in that very tall, big blue stem. And one of my really great friends, Lance, who some of you might know, and some folks from INHF. And Golden Hills and INHF both have seed collections right now going on. So they're like every week or every other week. You can check out their Facebook pages or their websites. But it's super fun. And honestly, when I started doing these are probably where I learned the most about when is seed ready, what does it look like, etc. So also when you're collecting, we want to keep in mind genetic diversity. And when we're seed collecting in the prairie, that just means that we want to make sure in any stand of plants that we're taking from a significant amount of plants. So you're not going to go out to your big blue stem and just only collect the seeds from one clump of big blue stem, right? You're going to go out and you're going to have at least 10, maybe more than that, plants that you're collecting from. And I actually collect as I walk. And I don't know, again, I'm not an expert by any means. This is just something that like makes sense in my brain. So if I'm on a remnant or a restoration in an area, I'm kind of like taking a little bit from here, walking forward, finding that same species, taking a little bit from here, walking forward, finding the same species. So it's kind of like meditative in a way, and I'm just making sure that I'm getting that diversity from the area. Prairies like interaction. If we think about how prairies were managed in the past, fire, bison, like hundreds of thousands of bison, maybe millions, I'm not quite sure because I wasn't there, roaming the land and interacting with these prairies. So that's something I also love about seed collection is, for me, it's kind of like being connected to what it might have been like to be in more relationship with this landscape. And I feel that the most when I'm collecting seed. Something to consider, that this is from the Tallgrass Prairie Center, and I love it. Be mindful of legal and ethical considerations when collecting. While remnant prairies are important local genetic sources of seed stock for a restoration or for growing out plants, for seed nurseries, they should not be directly exploited for commercial production of seed. So if you have a remnant, or if you're gonna be collecting from remnants and you're growing out plants, I just want to encourage you to remember that we also need to care for and take care of those remnants, right? We need to make sure we're getting fire on them. We need to make sure that we're cutting out woodies. We need to make sure that if we are taking anything from the land, how are we also giving back to it so that we make sure that we're not exploiting it? So to collect, the seeds must be ready. I just took these pictures this week. So this is Prairie Blazing Star, and none of the seed here is ready in any of these. Actually, the most ready is going to be on your right-hand side. At the very top. So you can see that blazing star, it's starting to like plume open or puff open, okay? And it's not until they're really ready to be wind dispersed, which this plant is wind dispersal, that that seed is actually ready. So in the other ones, you can see the beautiful, the seeds are still kind of in that pod there, and you can still see that the flowers are blooming. So oftentimes I'll be out at a seed collection and someone will like go up to this and they'll be like, well, the top one, like those seeds are done. And they'll just run their hand along the stem or pull the plant. And it's like, it's not ready. Those seeds are not mature. Okay. So again, we want to make sure that we're collecting at the right time. Here are some examples of seeds that are ready. We have cup plant on the left. We have Monarda fistulosa in the middle. And then we have yucca. Monarda fistulosa, those seed pods are just so super cool. The tiny little seeds are in the inside and you just shake them out to get those. They're like little rattles. But those seed pod in particular, I found hold a lot of moisture. So you do need to be careful. And I'm going to mention that later, but we never want to seed collect when it's wet. Okay. So like, it kind of rained a little bit today, and then I think tomorrow it's going to rain. So we're not going to collect seed probably for a few days. I will actually go out and I will just like check out the plants, right? And if I'm feeling any moisture in the seed pods or the stems, I know that I'm not going to seed collect. Okay. It's got to be dry, bone dry, which we've had, right? So it's been great seed collection leading up to this. Here are some more examples. We're opening yucca seed pods into, again, brown paper sacks. They're the easiest things for collecting seed. We have milkweed and then big blue stem. And the last thing I want to say, and I actually, again, I was with a forester the other day, and I'm so inspired by her. But she talked about how fruiting trees, the fruit will actually give when it's ripe, right? Okay, or it will even fall to the ground. And the best and the ripest fruit that you can eat and find are going to be those squishy ones, kind of on the ground that just dropped. It's the same with prairie seed. When the seed is ready for you to harvest it, you do not have to be rough, just very gently, especially with the grasses. You can just run your hand along the grasses, Indian grass, little blue, big blue. Little blue is not very ready right now. And the seed will give. And that's another way to know that the seed is ready to be harvested and that the seed is mature. These I just found the other day, and they're super cool. I don't know, they're probably pretty small, but this is from Chicago, Isabella Redlinsky, the Field Museum. This shows the dried, the seed heads. So that's another thing to look for, is like you want to be able to identify what a seed head looks like when it's dry. And when I would teach kiddos, I would actually just cut whole seed heads off, because it's really fun to show them like the whole umbel, or the seed pods of echinacea, or the grasses, and then allow them to pick off and open those seed pods, right? So you kind of want to look at diagrams and things like this. This was just a great one that I found that I love. And then my other favorite thing, and this is also from the Tallgrass Prairie Center website, you can find it, but they have this guide, and it shows you what prairie seedlings look like when they're tiny in the spring. So I don't know if you're ever out in your garden or farm or on land, and you're like, oh man, I kind of recognize that little thing coming up, but I'm not quite sure what plant it is. This guide is amazing for that. At the very end of it, though, they have these ruler sticks, and then they have what the dried seeds look like. So you can see that picture there, and then I have another one here. So again, sometimes folks are like, what's the seed? What's the chaff? Anyone else kind of run into that? Like you're getting seed and you're like, I don't actually know what the seed, I'm seeing some heads nod. It's hard to figure it out. That's okay. So over time, you'll just more and more, you'll realize which part is actually the seed. And then back to plant families, when you learn your plant families, the seeds are similar. So that's another thing why I love botany in a day, and I love encouraging people to learn those plant families. So after you have collected your seeds, maybe you collected some ones that are in seed pods, or maybe there's a lot of chaff. In this picture on the far right-hand side in my seed screen, we're working with some compass plant there. Compass plant, cut plant, there's a lot of chaff in there, and you got to get out those kind of feathery seeds. So I just like to use seed screens. I have a set that I've purchased. If you want to talk more about seed equipment afterward, come up and chat with me, and I can throw you some ideas. There's no one method for processing seed. It is trial and error, my friends. If you don't have machinery or equipment, some people have processed seed with me. So they're like, yeah, I know, we spent hours just figuring out how to do one species. The echinacea seed heads, though, are really fun because you can break those with a hammer. Baptisia alba is really fun because you get those little like dental hooks, and you kind of scrape out the inside of that seed pod to get the little seeds out. So, you just kind of like figure it out and use what you have. You can also do some winnowing, like with a fan for seed processing. And I was super bummed because I'm not very tech savvy at all. And I have videos of like us using fans and using fire and like stuff like that, but I couldn't figure out how to put them on here. So I was bummed. We did a big seed processing day out at my farm last season, and it was a blast. Just make sure when you're processing, again, store it properly. We're going to talk about that, and make sure that you label. I swear to you, there are still times, even though I've been collecting for a while, where I like open a black bag and I know it's a blazing star. I know it's a liatris, and I have no stinking idea what species it is. And I'm like, oh, well, this is going in a seed mix. So that happens. Process in community. I already mentioned that. Here we're doing yucca, Indian grass, and other things, sifting them through screens, just using screens and totes over and over and over again, sifting and picking and all that. Here are some other dry processing I was doing, and then a seed mix on the side. So, you know, you can look at what a seed, this is the Golden Hills, putting some seed that they collected all together into into a big tote for a seed mix. Okay, just like any seed, it's got to be stored out of sunlight and it's got to be dry, okay? Dark containers, glass jars are fine if you're putting them in a tote, but you don't want to be storing your seed on display. I do have old seed that I store on display at my house because I love it, but that's not my viable seed. That's not my seed I'm growing out. I have no idea what the germination rate on that is going to be anymore. You don't want to use plastic bags, paper packets, paper envelopes, paper bags, totes, and you don't want moisture. So you want to make sure that you're not having a lot of moisture or condensation. So like your kitchen, probably not a good place to store your seeds. Your basement, if it's dry and dark and you have a good cabinet, probably a great place. Closets, great place to store your seeds. Fingernail test is something you can do to also understand if your seed is, not all seeds are going to crack with your fingernail, though, not all prairie seeds. But that's something that you can make sure if there is just an indent into the seed when you go to try and snap it, it's not dry enough, okay? So I like to set my seed after we collect seed and process it. I like to set my seed out in a dry place for usually about 24 hours. I'm just getting it a little more dry. Just want to make sure I don't have any moisture going on. So let's say you're not going to collect seed, but you want to grow prairie plants, which is the second part of this conversation here today. There are fabulous places for you to source ecotype seed in Iowa. Back to the Tall Grass Prairie Center on their website. In the resources page, they have a whole entire list. It's like a big Excel spreadsheet, okay? And they update it every year. And so my recommendation is to go check that out and look for whomever is closest to you on that list. But those are great places to source your seed and get really good, high quality seed that you can work with. Prairie Legacy on the Nebraska side is really awesome. So I just wanted to give Kay a little shout there. But there's good places where you can source seed. And just remember that you want to get seed that is ideally ecotype, meaning from your bioregion, from where you're growing out. But if not, close, you know, Iowa, Nebraska, Great Plains area, please look for that. So just remember that we have lots of different prairies. And so if you're sourcing from further away, it might not be what you would want to use in a restoration that you're going to do here, right? You want it to match the species here. That's what's meant to grow here. And so that's important. So for seed starting, oh my gosh, so much fun. So you have your seed or you sourced your seed, you stored it properly, and now you're like, okay, it's time to start growing. So I actually start a lot of my prairie plugs in November and December. And that is because prairie seedlings have the seeds, have seed treatments. So unlike, you know, your bean seed that you direct sow outside into the soil, or your tomato seed even that you start 8 weeks before, you know, our last freeze, so that you can establish those tomato plants that aren't meant to grow here before you plant them out in your garden. Prairie plants need an even additional step. And the reason they do is because we're mimicking nature. So we're mimicking that freeze thaw, or that hard freeze, what happens in nature in the winter in order for seeds to break their dormancy, okay? So all of the seed treatments are to assist that seed, that embryo, that living thing with all the genetic data in there to break its dormancy. It's really, really cool. I like to start mine early. I want things well established. I also have a date in mind that I want my seedlings to be ready because I sell them. So, or if I'm doing large plantings, or if I have someone that needs them by a certain date, like a county conservation entity, then I need to work backwards and make sure I'm going to get them ready. So, you also want your seedlings to be really well established, and some of these babies grow really, really, really slow. They're like, they just take their time. They're like grandma tortoise, okay? So there have been plants that I've grown out, literally started in November, gone through that cold stratification, brought them into my greenhouse and heat in January, and by June, they're like this big. So, growing year round, which is something I would love to have the money to do at some point, and being able to run a structure so I can keep those plants going would be really, really great and really key for some of these slower growing ones. You can also start seedlings in the fall. We're past the window now, but you can also start things like July, August. Sometimes heat can be an issue with that. But remember, those ones that take longer to grow, they're resilient. As long as you are keeping an eye on that root, because those roots, prairie plants grow their roots first, right? That's why restorations take so long, because you're putting the seed down, and that seed, they are establishing themselves. And so they're going to be growing their roots and growing their roots, and the plants on top are like this tall. So that's where they put their energy, and that's good. We want them to do that. But same thing with your seedlings. You might have to keep potting them up and potting them up and potting them up into like longer containers or bigger containers, and that's okay. I'm not going to have time to go over all these germ codes, and that's okay. That's like maybe a 2.0, and I would prefer a hands-on class. But here they are. There are many things to do to these seeds. I would say cold stratification is one of the most common that I work with. And this is my guide. This thing is like 30 pages long. It is from the Wild Ones Lake to Prairie chapter, Seed Germination Code Guide. Okay, I have this in a binder. It's dirty as heck. It sits on my potting table, and I have been using it for years. And so I get a species. I don't know what the heck to do with it. I look it up. So I don't have these memorized. I mean, I have like the most common ones, but that's okay. You don't have to memorize them. You just look it up, and it's going to tell you what to do. Prairie Moon Nursery, wonderful, also has what to do. It'll tell you what to do for each germ code on their website. So, but just so if you didn't know, yes, there's stuff you got to do to these babies. Okay, so for the cold stratification, I'm going to go over that one. And there's two ways to kind of do it. You can do it outside, or you can do it in a refrigerator. And I have a picture on the next slide, which is going to make a little more sense. But for the refrigerator method, you can mix the seed with sterile sand, sawdust, or vermiculite, and place it in a wet coffee filter, usually rinsing it, and then cover by a paper towel in a Ziploc bag. So it's kind of a 3-step process, if you will. And I'm just going to go ahead to the next slide here. So you can see they're taking their seed, they're rinsing it in a colander, but the filter is there, which is nice because you just like 2 steps at one time. You're putting your seed on the filter, you're getting the filter nice and damp. And then they are going to fold that over. They're going to fold it loosely, and then put a paper towel over it, stick it in a Ziploc. What are you going to do? Label it. You don't want to be digging around in these seeds like, oh my gosh, is like, what is this one? I forgot what seed's in this bag. Oh, shoot. And then you want to check it weekly because you don't want it to dry out. So you might have to change again, it's whenever people ask me about gardening, I'm like, I can tell you what I do and I can tell you what my experience has been, but everybody's refrigerator is different. Everybody's yard is different. Everybody's sunny south facing window is different. So you might have to check it. You might need to change it. You want to keep it moist, okay? If for some reason your seeds sprout, plant them. You're going to throw them in some soil. You're going to need to plant them. I use plug trays, and I'll get into that in a second for all of my plantings. But you're going to keep them in there on your seed packet. It tells you everything. It's going to tell you how many days, okay? So 30 is really common, 60, 90. So when you think about 90 days, back to starting early, okay? If you have a cold stratification of 90 days, that means it has to be either outside, which is, I'll tell you about that method, or in your fridge 90 days before you even plant it in soil. Then it needs to go in soil and it needs to germinate. So, you're talking a couple months, right, until you can even plant it. And if you want these things ready by May, June for summer planting, you really got to work backwards. That's why I teach planting your plantings in November. I seed my trays and I put them in the snow. Okay. Now, how much snow have we been getting? Not much, right? So climate change is disrupting one of my favorite things to do in my life, which is starting native seeds and putting them outside in the snow. But you can use this method. So again, I sow everything into a moist soil, and then I put my trays out in a place where they're not going to get a lot of sun, and I keep them moist. And I do that by traipsing out there and throwing snowpack on them. Or if we aren't getting snow, I do water them. And I have critters, so I also keep like a screen over the top of them to prevent any type of things messing up. I've had deer step on trays and crack them and break them or whatever, but that's okay. So when you are going to you treat your seed after the seed treatment, you're ready to start them. Your soil is going to be absolutely everything. And you want to make sure you have something that has ideally some type of organic compost or organic fertilizer. I only use OMRI approved products. OMRI is what is allowable with the National Organic Program or the Certified Organic USDA program. So I have to have that OMRI label on there. I really love Beautiful Land. They are local. They're out of West Branch, Iowa. And I use their organic germination mix, and I've been using it for over a decade, and it's just my friend. So there you go. I don't work for them. Prairie seeds are really tiny. So I love, this is one of my favorite things to teach with like littles too, is like you sprinkle it like pepper or salt. Like you just, that's what I do. You can use tweezers. You can use those cool seed devices to get things where you want them to go. I really just use my hands. Poppy mallow, I'm sowing here. And you must have plug trays or something with drainage, whatever you want to use. Plants are going to start a lot better if they're started out in a smaller container and they have a few seeds with them, and they're going to develop their roots really well. And that's why as farmers, we start everything in these plug trays. There's actual science behind it, and we want good germination. You can use egg cartons, you can use DIY, anything you have, like please go ahead. You just need to have drainage, and some of those containers can dry out quickly. And for anything you're starting, prairie or anything, you have to keep your soil moist and watered at all times, always. So it can never dry out while you're waiting for your plants to germinate. Always wet your seed mix, your soil mix, excuse me, not your seed mix, your soil mix before you are starting your plants. So you are going to do these lovely steps that you can see my daughter Mira demonstrating here. This is what we use in our greenhouse, a wheelbarrow. We wet our Beautiful Land soil mix, the fine germination mix. We fill our plug trays, and we do that by making sure that that whole entire plug has soil in it. And I cannot say enough for the prairie seedlings, that is of utmost importance because again, prairie plants establish their roots, and they have deep, beautiful, wonderful roots. So they need a lot of space in there, and they're going to need all that soil. But you don't want to pack it in like concrete or, you know, clay, right? We don't want it packed in there. So we just gently fill that whole entire tray, put some more soil on it, and make sure all of those plugs are totally full. I'm going to be teaching a greenhouse class this winter. So like, come just do it with me. It's way more fun than me talking at you and telling you how to do it. And then we move the seed trays to our potting bench, and that's where we sow the seeds. Here I'm working with, it could be Indian grass. I'm not entirely 100% on that one. And it looks like a blazing star and purple prairie clover. But you can kind of see the indents that I've made in the plug tray. You don't need to plant them very deep. I really just like do an indent. So I'm not going all the way down to that plug. I'm just doing like at the top, just an indent. The seeds don't like to be planted very deep. And again, the soil is always moist. It is moist when we put it in the tray. It is moist when we put more on top of the tray, and it is kept moist at all times. Bottom heat is something I'm going to recommend for you. It's kind of hard to see, but behind those pots in this greenhouse, there's a rolled up mat, a heat mat. Those are wonderful. You can find them on Farm Tech, Farmer's Supply, Johnny's, lots of different farm and garden supply. Actually, you can find them. Actually, I just want to say that all of those local hardware places are getting so much better with seed starting equipment. I don't know if you start seeds indoors, but like when I started teaching this like a decade ago, there was like nothing at those stores. I'd be like, go find a germination mix or find plug trays. And and now they have it at like Lowe's and Home Depot and Menards and Walmart. Walmart has seed starting stuff. So that's cool. That means that like more people are starting their own plants, and I love it. I've seen heat mats, I think at like places. But I actually use heat coils. Again, I'm working on a bigger scale, so I need like a lot of space that I'm heating. Bottom heat, again, mimics nature. Seeds germinate based on two things, moisture and soil temperature. Okay. Some seeds like and need light for germination, but so when we use the bottom heat, we are mimicking nature and we're mimicking that soil temperature. I don't have a lot of time to talk about cold frames, but cold frames, milk jugs for cold stratification, that's another technique. You can DIY that and do that yourself. Set those up. That can be successful. I've seen it be successful. When your seedlings have what we call true leaves and well-established roots, you need to pot them up, okay? So it doesn't end with the plug. You've got to have a larger container that you're going to put them in. I use 2.5, 3, and 3.5-ish containers. But I'm not keeping my seedlings in them very long. Again, prairie roots, they're going to get deep, so you might have to pot them up even more. Hardening off is not as much. If the prairie is growing, you can put your prairie seedlings outside. So they are very resilient. They are very hardy. If you are out in the prairie and the plants are starting to come up and things are going well, unless we're going to have a real hard frost, hard freeze, those seedlings are going to be all right going outside. So I move my prairie stuff out. I also don't water it very often. Again, I want my plants to be really resilient. They're already drought tolerant. That is what the prairie is. It's why we should be growing it everywhere because we are going to continue to have drought, my friends. But they don't need a ton of water, which is glorious. Unlike, if you don't water your pepper plant every day and it's hot outside, it's going to die. This is just an example of potting up. So I separate my seedlings a lot. This is purple prairie clover. Look how cute those are. They're tiny. But okay, do you see those little hands? For those of you that know purple prairie clover or the clovers, 5-anthered, 13-anthered, they have these little, like their leaves are just so beautiful. So you can see those are true leaves right there. I've got the cotyledon, which is what's going to sprout first underneath. But once they start having those, they have a well-established root. They're ready to go. I don't know how well you can see, but you can see those roots. There's little hairs, right? They're very, I guess, just like it makes me sad when I'm potting up annual plants. I'm just sad for them. I'm like, you guys, you're just so weak. Like your roots suck. And like, if I don't take care of you every day, it's like I'm a cat person, okay? Which is why I think I'm a prairie person. Because I'm like, needy dogs, I love you, but like, come on, like, can you do anything for yourself? No, you need me every second. So this is just an example of potting up some babies. I see prairie mimosa in there. I see some monardas and some prairie sage and yarrow and all that stuff. Again, just pictures of potting up. So some of the grasses, right? They'll have like, they'll just have this like leaf that's sticking out. And you're like, are you even a plant? You're like, what? It's just like a stem. It's so weird. But then they'll have massive roots underneath. So they are ready to be potted up. Like they're screaming. In the middle, that looks like partridge pea. So again, at the bottom, you see the cotyledons. I'm going to separate those out because I've got like 3 plants there. And then you see the true leaves at the top. Nope, that's prairie mimosa. I lied. That's Illinois bundleflower. And then on the far right is a really, okay, so I seed thick. And one of the reasons is I'm hand collecting seed. So if you are hand collecting seed, I will recommend that you seed your trays really thick because you don't actually know, like, are all these seeds mature? You didn't do a germination test on them. You didn't buy them from a company that did a germination test on them. So, I want to make sure I get a lot of plants. My cell trays are 128. So, I probably have like 240 plants, yarrows there in one tray. But that's great. Resources, I kind of already mentioned, and sorry, this is tiny and I'm willing to share anything with anybody because I believe in open source information. And Iowa Prairie Network is great. That is a great place to just come out with us into the prairies. Our group is all volunteer run, and we are a bunch of prairie nerds. If you have not been to the Loess Hills Prairie Seminar, it's a 3-day free event in the Loess Hills where you will learn more, and we have a kids program, than anything about the Loess Hills Prairie specifically. Golden Hills, Tallgrass Prairie Center, if you haven't visited, check them out. INHF also is doing seed collecting right now, but I honestly think the best way is to just get out there. There is an Iowa Native Plant Listserv. I know I'm talking a lot about Iowa. Sorry, that's for all the Nebraska. You can do all of these things too. We welcome you. And so there's just so many great organizations offering free opportunities for folks to come and engage. So with that, I want to say thank you. This is my email address. And that is some of the Loess Prairie where I live. And I'm going to take questions. No. Yeah.
I just wondered when you have all those plugs and
Yeah.
you're trying to get them out
Yes.
without wrecking your roots, do you have a favorite technique for that?
That's such a great question. Yeah. Pencils. Okay. So my plug trays have little holes in the bottom. So I actually, and the other cool thing about prairie plants versus like your peppers is that, their roots are going to be really established. So, I either will just pull them out from the top by squeezing the bottom of my container really gently, or a pencil will fit through the hole in my plug trays. So actually that's a thing that I have my kids do. I'll give them a matted tray like that, and I'll be like, okay, just take the pencil and get every single plug out. And then we go to town potting up. Yeah. I like to do it fast because I've got a lot of plants to work with, but great question.
So I've been collecting seeds from my plants. There's an area at the end of my street. It's a circle, and then it's a very tall hill behind these houses.
Yeah.
And so I've been collecting my seeds, and I'm going to go ask those neighbors if they mind if I plant seeds up on that hill.
Yeah.
Can I just do the natural way and just throw the seeds out this fall onto the ground and just whatever happens, happens?
Yep. So that is like one of the number one questions that we get. When is the time to plant a prairie? So I'm going to defer to someone I consider an expert, who's John Judson of Diversity Farms, who's also on the IPN board. His whole entire company, Diversity Farms, does prairie restoration. His answer to that question is the best time to plant a prairie is today and any day. He has planted and restored some of his best prairies in the middle of July. Now that sounds super wild to me, right? Because I'm like, what? So I will say that for me, when I'm doing prairie strips, I have had the best luck with frost seeding. Okay. And so what that means is you wait this time of year, wait until we get a little bit of snow cover on the ground, and then mix your mix with sawdust. Look up the percent. It's like a 1/4 sawdust and 3/4 seed. Don't quote me on that. I would have to look it up again. And I would just sow right on top of the snow pack. Okay. Again, we're mimicking nature when we do that. Another great time for seeding, I think, can be spring, early spring. But absolutely. Like even sometimes when I'm just not out seed collecting, I'm collecting seed and laying it down in areas that are maybe more brony, or maybe, other things that I don't want are out competing. So I'm not going to say that no, but I do really like frost seeding, and I think it can be successful. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thanks, Cait.
Yeah. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Great. Thanks for coming.